So, governance is fundamentally about understanding risk, time horizons, and long term consequences. And actuaries spend their whole careers thinking about exactly that. So, the question isn't why should actuaries be on boards? It's why haven't more actuaries made it to the board? So, Brandon, tell me, how, as an actuary, did you end up going into non exec work?
So I think it started off for me actually starting in the pro bono space. I got involved with some charities about 10 years before I actually started getting into non-exec director work in a commercial sense. And I found I quite liked it. I was interested in the detail. You could see the full breadth of an organization, who does what, lots of legal issues, lots of regulatory issues. And it was something which, when I had a change hit me in 2018, when a role came to an end and I was had a whole lot of pathways open to me, I thought, oh, let me explore this non-exec director space. I've done it in the trustee space for charities. I wonder what it's like for companies. My last role in my executive career was on an exco, but interacting with board members. And first of all, I was blown away by the caliber of the people who sat on boards. And I thought, wow, these people are really smart. They understand things. I want to be like them when I grow up. And that was very much a key driver for me.
So, the Isle of Man financial services appointment is a regulatory role. Tell me, how did that come about? What's that been like?
I'm no stranger to regulation. So I worked at the Financial Services Authority here in the UK before it split into the FCA and the PRA. So that was a brilliant time to work there. So I joined the week when Northern Rock had a little bit of a problem during the global financial crisis. What always entertains me that more and more I'm speaking to people and they say, "Oh yes, I learned about that at uni," and I realize I'm starting to get old. But I joined the Financial Services Authority that week. It was a fascinating time to work at the regulator, and I sat in a sector team which sat across policy areas, risk management areas. On the rare occasion, we'd even get involved in enforcement. And I just loved the big picture. I loved being able to see how all the moving parts fit together. You've got a little bit of law, you've got a little bit of risk management, you've got a little bit of a finger in every single pie. And it was extremely intellectually stimulating. And again, same as I said about the non-executive directors, very high caliber of individual tended to be involved in this. Also, people who were very, very thoughtful, people who really cared about the industry, really cared about consumers. So that was my first taste of regulatory work. And when I started my non-exec career, I was keeping my eye out for opportunities to get involved and logged onto dynamic boards and saw an ad for the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority board role. And I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity. And of course, the Isle of Man is a little microcosm of the UK. It got everything. It got a prudential regulator, a conduct regulator, a pension regulator. It had a two-tier parliament, which it claims to be the oldest sitting parliament in history, about 1,000 years of sitting. And it's a great place to almost learn your trade as a non-executive director, as a board member of a regulator, because you have to see a bit of everything.
So you built governance experience before your first formal NED appointment. What did that period really look like in practice? And what would you tell someone who thinks they can skip it?
So the first thing I always tell anyone who wants to go into network is it's not very glamorous. A great deal of it is what would be deathly boring to most people, because I think a lot of people wouldn't get super excited about what's in the terms of reference, what's in the risk register, should we sign off the accounts. A lot of it is governance. It is very, very important, but maybe not the most thrilling of stuff. But if you care about how organizations work, if you care about what makes organizations tick, and you're willing to accept that some of it won't be that scintillating, but some of it is brilliant. Some of it is what incentivizes people. Why do people behave the way they behave? How does policy, which you set at a board level, filter down into how organizations work and actually influence the customer at the coalface? It's brilliant, but it's not for everyone. And you actually have to quite enjoy governance. You have to enjoy quite technical discussions about things which are very often points of detail. Of course, we'll talk in a second, I'm sure, about only up to a point, because when you're on a board, you are generally overseeing and steering. You're not doing all the work. So you will get a lot of detail, but it won't necessarily be to the level of when you run an organization. You are steering and overseeing an organization. And you have to understand that and go in eyes open, because it's not for everyone.
You sat on commercial, regulatory, and public interest boards. What transitions surprised you the most? And where did your assumptions get challenged?
So I think they're very different beasts, a commercial entities board and a regulator's board. Obviously, what they've got in common is going to be the day to day, I'd say, ABCs of boardcraft, how you do things, what's expected of you, what your role is versus the role of the executive, what power and authority you have. So that's common to the two organizations. But your raison d'etre is obviously going to be different. In a commercial organization, how are we going to be successful? We have a Companies Act responsibility to do right by our shareholders. If you're in a regulated financial services firm, you're trying to work out where that might be in tension with obviously your regulatory responsibilities. But it is pretty clear you're juggling those stakeholders that you need to balance on a commercial board. On a regulatory board, you're very much a creature of statute. Your whole raison d'etre is going to be set out in some relevant act. Your powers will be set out there, and what you can and can't do is going to be pretty clear. And you're more worried about how does your entity achieve its statutory objectives rather than success perhaps measured by profitability or market share. Um, Again, like I say, lots in common in terms of the board craft and how you do things, but obviously what you do and who your stakeholders are will be different.
What's the thing that nobody warned you about? The part of being a Ned that caught you off guard, would you say?
It's a great question. So I'll tell you what people did warn me about is there's a lot of reading, and so you will need to read a lot of papers. You need to be able to absorb them. You don't need to be an expert on them, but obviously you need to be able to ask questions about them. I think the thing which I wouldn't say nobody warned me about, people did warn me about is you need to have your nose in, but your hands out. And that's really frustrating for someone who's been used to being at the coalface, being a senior manager in a business, rolling up their sleeves and getting things done. You come to the table once every couple of months or once a quarter, and you get a glimpse of what's happening in a business. And it's great because it's a glimpse which looks at the whole breadth of the business, but it doesn't go very deep. And your ability to influence is quite limited. And you have to really try and work out what do I say, what don't I say. The board's not your chance to sit on your high horse and lecture people. You're always trying to think about how can I be useful. If I say that comment, is it going to add value? If I say that in a way which comes across as critical, am I going to put someone's back up? So what I suppose you might not realize is that there's a lot of diplomacy involved, but you still need to be able to say what has to be said because you're taking a lot of risk and liability as a director. So you can't just be nice for the sake of being nice and not offending people. You really are walking that line between doing your job, but doing it in a way that brings people with you.
Thank you, Brandon. Beyond the obvious, strategic thinking, asking good questions, what separates the Neds who really contribute from the ones who don't?
I think knowing knowing your limitations is quite useful. And I'll tell you a mistake that I've made in the past as a Ned, which is I've gone and read up furiously on something so that I felt, oh, now I can ask really good questions of the executive because I know as much as them. And it's not a competition. It's not you trying to bring your ego to the table to say, well, I've got 20, 30 years experience. You've got to listen to me because, I'm this really smart Ned. It's much more of a supportive mentoring coaching kind of role. It's not you must listen to me because I'm so smart. It's wow, you've worked so hard on this. I can see you've thought about all these things. Have you thought about this thing? And it's a different way of working. So you kind of have to check your ego at the door, which not everyone's going to find that easy to do. I don't find it easy to do. We've all got egos, but that's something I would definitely say is quite useful.
Great reflection, thank you. What's your most persistent myth about board careers that you wish you could correct?
You're going to do hardly any work, get paid tons of money, and be, having long lunches every day. So anyone who tells you this is great, if you're in your 40s or your 50s, you can quit your job, get four or five of these fantastic roles, get paid 150K each, you'll be trousering 60K, sorry, 600K. This is amazing. Um, they happen a bit, okay, but they're a little bit like unicorns. You won't find many people who have got that kind of portfolio. The chances are when you start your portfolio, you'll have fairly modest fees. You'll probably be working extremely hard because you're trying to actually learn how to be a Ned. So any sort of myth that this is a free lunch or a nice, easy way to get a lot of money and do much work, do very little work, I think I disabuse anyone of that notion. And the other big one is it this is not your chance to drive companies. This is your chance to help oversee and support and influence companies. If you're really somebody who wants to drive a company, you probably want to be on the other side of the table as an executive and not as a non-executive.
If someone came to you tomorrow asking how to land their first Ned role, what's the one piece of advice you'd leave with? And what's the one mistake you'd tell them to avoid?
The best piece of advice I would give you is actually from a headhunter that I've spoken to over the years. And what they've said is when you look at roles that you want to apply to, really look at what they're asking for and think about, do you fit into that? Because it's very easy for us to think, oh, well, I'll give it a go. And it's never been easier to give it a go with all these various different generative AI tools, which will write your application for you. But do read it very carefully because you'll probably save yourself a lot of time and save them sifting if you are miles away. I'm not saying don't do things speculatively, but it is worth actually reading the spec. Um, the other thing I would just say on that is if you are using the various generative AI tools and you plug in your CV and you plug in a role and you say, am I a good fit? They will almost always say, oh, yes, it's fabulous. You should go for it. And then you say to them, well, are you sure? Can you map me to the role? And they'll say, oh, well, you might need to do a bit of work here, there, and everywhere. So just use these tools with care because they're very clever, but they're sycophants. They're trained to be sycophants. So you do need to just sort of poke them a bit and say, could you be a bit realistic or adopt the persona of the person who's actually sifting the application? So by all means, try and shoot for the stars, but also be realistic about where you're a fit. In terms of something which I would say you want to avoid is there's no shortage of organizations which are promising you that with their course or their certification or their diploma or their paid for networking service, you will get your first NED role. I wouldn't say they're all perhaps not that effective, but I would just treat them with a certain amount of skepticism because you shouldn't need to be paying lots of money to apply for roles. You should be just getting out there, seeing what you can do, speaking to people, using websites like dynamic boards, and just getting stuck in.
So back to my opening question, why haven't more actuaries made it onto boards? And where does that transition mostly break down? How did you get through it?
So there actually are loads of actuaries on boards, and I'm lucky enough to know a number of them, and I've met them over the years through various networking organizations. You'll also find a lot of actuaries in the livery movement. So I'm a member of the Worshipful Company of Actuaries, and a good number of our members serve on boards or have served on boards, and some of that is actuaries who really take the idea of service very seriously. We are a profession who takes our responsibilities very seriously. But you will also find lots of actuaries who won't find their way onto boards. And the reason for that is most actuaries, I don't want to generalize, but most actuaries love getting stuck into the detail, love being the person who is really smart in the room, love solving problems, and love getting their hands dirty. And that's not necessarily going to be a compatible behavioral kind of blueprint for sitting on a board because when there's a problem, the actuary wants to put their hand up and say, this is what you should do. And what I've had to learn in my role sitting on boards is try to understand what the problem is, try to see what the executive are doing to solve it, and then be a critical friend to try and perhaps steer them towards they could do. That's very hard for somebody who wants to roll up their sleeves and get stuck in. So you have loads of actuaries on boards, but you probably don't have as many as you could because that transition and that mind shift, that change to being a overseer and a critical friend rather than a doer is hard. And also that idea of checking your ego at the door. Actuaries are smart. We know we're smart, and it's quite hard when you're the smartest person in the room, or think you're the smartest person in the room, to put your finger to the lips and just sort of let other people speak.